Should you reward your kids for obedience? Oh, that's a tough question, but we're going to tackle that one today. So stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Is obedience something that should be rewarded? That is not a one size fits all. Here's the one easy answer, but we're going to tackle that today because here at the Life's Key 3 podcast, we are not afraid to dive into tough issues, and we're willing to acknowledge that everything in life, and especially in parenting, isn't just a plug and play. It's not just here's the formula, and as long as you follow it, here's going to be the outcome. Nope, because we are people that are raising people, and that means complexity and nuance, and you've got to know each person as an individual and work with them according to what season of life you're in, what your personality is, what your lifestyle is, and what your dynamics are for the present. Hey, before we dive into today's topic on this whole issue of rewarding obedience, I want to invite you to visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and I especially want to draw your attention to the speaking engagements that I have for parents. One of those in particular has to do with what we might call strong-willed children. Know any of those? Got any of those? Are you one? Are you married to one? Well, I'm going to give you a different perspective on the strong will. And that's not because I am going along with some of today's trends that kind of act like everything is about environment. And if you just are the perfect parent with your kids, you are never going to have any significant clashes of conflict. Ha, ha, ha. That does not align with how human beings are designed and how we function. But I think that there is a perspective that we have about will, and especially when we talk about strong-willed kids, that we've gotten kind of wrong. And we have handicapped ourselves and our children because of that. So if you are part of a Christian school, a homeschool organization, a church, or any kind of a faith-based organization, and you are looking to bring in a speaker, or maybe you're not part of a faith-based organization, but you're not opposed to having a faith-based speaker that's going to come in and share on some parenting topics, then check out my website, stephaniepresents.com. There's a contact form in there. You can also email me for more information, stephanie@stephaniepresents.com. All right, enough of that. Let's dive into today's topic on this whole question of, do we reward obedience in our kids? The simple answer to that is yes and no. Okay, you're going to say, well, that's not very helpful. Stick with me. Let me unpack this a little bit. If you've been listening to a while, one of the things that you've heard me reference is that all of life is lived on a line of tension. Now, I don't mean by that anxiety and stress. I'm not saying that living these lives of high anxiety and stress and where we're always in tension is normal or healthy at all. That's not what I mean. What I want you to picture instead is like a tightrope or like a line that is held secure on two opposite ends. Maybe you have electrical lines that run overhead in your area, or if there are still phone lines, if they even still exist overhead. And you see that those are held taut. They're held in a state of tension between two opposite ends. And life is like that. And I don't just mean in terms of, well, there's good and bad, right and wrong. Yes, there is that tension as well. But rather that there are two truths that hold each other in tension. And it is that tension that holds that line tight that allows us to progress with a state of balance. You know, tightrope walkers have to learn incredible balance. They have to keep themselves balanced at all times because just a little tiny bit of a misstep or not being able to balance when the environment shifts, when there's wind or there's a movement in that line or something that would throw them off, they have to be able to maintain their balance. And in the same way, when we want to live balanced lives, we need to identify what are the true truths here that we need to identify to keep us in balance. And most relational advice, and this includes parenting, when it is not held in tension between two truths, ends up either just doing, not helping people in the long run, or it leads to real harm in the long run. And we see that society has a way of kind of going from one extreme to the other. And the reason for that is because they're just anchoring on one truth. So there's this one truth, and I'm going to grab a hold of, but instead of it being held in tension with another truth that holds it not in contradiction, but holds it tight in a place of tension, then we're just left swinging back and forth on this one rope, this one wire, and we go from one extreme to the other, but we never really are able to progress because we're not living balanced lives, and balance requires a state of tension. And at a macro level, this is one of the ways that you can gauge parenting advice and trends that you hear, that you read, or that you may choose to follow or to disregard. If someone is only focusing on one point, and that's the one that they talk about, if you aren't able to identify, okay, but what's the counterpoint? What's going to hold that in a state of tension so it creates balance? Then there's probably something there that either they haven't identified or you need to identify for yourself. And it's the same way as we're looking at this aspect of, do we reward our children for obedience? What's the answer? Yes and no. It's both. Because you see, we have two different truths. The first is obedience for obedience sake is a right expectation to have for your children. And we see that modeled for us by God, the perfect parent. Does he expect us, does he even command us to have obedience to him simply because it is our duty? Yes, absolutely. That is a principle that we see throughout Scripture. God has a right expectation that we are to walk in obedience to him for no other purpose than it is our calling, it is our obligation, it is our responsibility, because we are created by him for his glory, for his purposes. Okay, so as parents, do we have a right expectation that our children are to be obedient simply because it's the right thing? Absolutely. Now, here again, I am expecting, and all of this is dependent on this unstated expectation, at least something I haven't stated up until this point, and that is that what we are asking our children to be obedient in doing is reasonable and it is right. We do not have the right as parents to ask things of our children that they have neither the capacity to do, nor is it something that is morally correct. So I am not going to spend all the time being able to outline what all of that looks like. I expect that my audience are reasonable, rational people. So there's this truth that in normal, healthy conditions, that obedience for obedience sake is a right expectation to have of our children. But there is a counter truth. It's not a contradiction, it's a counterpoint. And it is this: obedience is also worth rewarding. Now, depending on your parenting style and your background and a host of other factors, your internal response to these 2 points may either be cheering or it may be jeering, or you may be going, yes, right on. That's true. Of course, obedience is worth rewarding. All obedience should be rewarded. Of course. And people ought to be doing that. And if they did that more, well, then their kids would be happier and life would be better and the whole world would be at peace. Or maybe you're like, I don't agree with that at all, Steph. I don't think obedience is worth rewarding. We're not supposed to have that as a primary truth that we hold to in our parenting. We are to expect our kids to obey simply because it's the right thing. Again, I want to point out, it's not that one of these is true and one is false. It's that they are both true. Now, making a claim that something is true is not something that I take lightly. And where I go back to support this is always, can it be found in scripture, in the Bible as a principle? And it can. Both of these can be. And so what I'm going to look at here is, for example, is in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, Jesus tells a story about a father with 2 sons. And the father goes to the first son and he says, hey, I need you to go do this for me. There's no guarantee of a reward. There's no, hey, if you do this, then I'm going to do this for you. It's just a request. Hey, I need you to go and to do this. And the first son says, sorry, not doing it, not me, and off he goes. And so the father goes to the second son and says, hey, I need you to go do this. And the second son says, oh, of course, absolutely, I will go and do that. And Jesus asks the question, which one obeyed? And the people answered and said, the first one. And Jesus says, you are correct. It wasn't the son who made the promise to go and obey that actually obeyed. It was the one who initially said, I'm not doing it. There's no indication here that the father then owed either son anything. There was no promise of a reward. There was no reciprocation here. There was no mutual understanding that if you go and do something, then I have the obligation to reward you. There's none of that. And we can see that throughout all of Scripture, is where we see that we are called to obedience. We are called to faithfulness because it is our duty. It is our response. But we also see the counterpoint is true. In Hebrews 11:6, it says, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who approaches him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That is a profound statement. It's not either one of those. It's not enough to believe that God exists. We must believe that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Why do we have to believe that? Because that is a statement of what we believe about God's character, not just his existence. God isn't looking for people who just believe in his existence. He is looking for people who want to be with him. You know, one of the questions is, how could a good God send anyone to hell? And you know, I mean, that's a complicated issue. But, you know, one of the things is, how kind of a God would he be if he insisted that people spend forever with him face to face when they don't even want to be in the same arena with him or the same area with him, and they don't even have to interact with him face to face just for a temporary period of time? I mean, you probably have somebody who was the last person that you would want to spend a year's worth a vacation with, even if you were in the best place that you can imagine for a vacation, there's probably at least one person that if you had to spend every moment of every day in your perfect place vacation with, you might just choose not to go at all. You would give up the year's worth of vacation in your perfect vacation spot if that person had to be with you 24/7. Why does God want to require people who don't want to have anything to do with him on this earth, in this distance that we have from him, to be with him face to face forever? He truly does honor the choices that we make. And in a similar way, what we want to think in terms of our children is that we're not just hopefully wanting them to believe that we are their parent and that we are the authority, any more than God is just wanting us to believe that he exists and that he has authority over us. He wants us to believe in his goodness towards us, in his character towards us, in his heart towards us, in his love for us, not just in his existence. And we want to model that as well with our children. We don't want to just so focus on the first truth, that obedience for obedience sake is a right expectation. Is that true? Yes, it is. But it's held in its proper place by the counterpart of that, which is that obedience is worth rewarding. Why? Because we would have the similar heart as God that says we want to reward those who are earnest in their obedience, who earnestly want to have a relationship with us, who earnestly want to please us. That is worth rewarding. And so we can follow that model with our own children. Another principle that comes out of that story in Matthew chapter 21 that Jesus tells, that parable that he tells about the two sons and the one that obeyed and the other one who didn't, is, there's a statement that has gone around for a while that says, it's only obedience if it's immediate. I mean, if a child doesn't follow through on something that they are told to do immediately, well, then it's disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. That's a phrase that we've heard. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't quite see that that's what Jesus says here in Matthew 21. As a matter of fact, he comes back and he asks the people, which son obeyed? And it was the one who had the delayed obedience that Jesus says they were the one who rightly obeyed, not the one who immediately responded by saying that he obeyed, but the one who actually delayed his obedience. And not only did he delay his obedience, he initially responds verbally by saying, not me, I ain't doing it. We want to be careful that we don't grab a hold of things that sound really good on the face value of it. And a statement like delayed obedience is disobedience, I mean, that sounds really good on the face of it, but the reality is very different. And when we look at our own lives, how many of us immediately obey God every single time that we are to do something? If you are holding up your hand, awesome. I'm not holding up mine, because there can be times when our hearts need time to get right and to change our mind. And that's exactly what happens with the son here in the parable that Jesus tells in Matthew 21. He has an initial response, but then as he calms down and he thinks about it, he changes his heart. And that is what we want to allow our children time to do as well, and not to respond so quickly to their immediate response that we don't ever create time for their heart to change. Because it's far better in the long run for our children to have that time to be able to change their heart so that they choose to obey out of a heart of wanting to please, out of a heart of wanting to do what's right, than just going through the motions externally, but not really with a right heart. So, on a very practical level, does this mean that every time your kid does something right, that you need to have some kind of chart and you pull out and you slap a sticker on it? No, I'm not advocating that. There are plenty of times that we do things that are right, and God doesn't all of a sudden, come out of heaven and show us some divine favor right away. But does that mean that you never reward obedience, or that it's so infrequent that in your child's timetable it's never? Because again, we need to remember that our children operates on different timetables. A week for a 3-year-old can be like the equivalent of a year for an adult. So we have to learn to think kind of in kid timetables and young people timetables, not just assign them and expect them to think in terms of adult timetables. So, is there a formula? No, there's not. This is where I would encourage you to pray about this, number one, and then just try different things and see what works. I would probably start by erring on the side of over celebrating and over rewarding, obviously with things that are reasonable. You don't go buy your 15-year-old a brand new car because they took the trash out on time. And in the same way, you're not going to run your 5-year-old off to the store to buy that $400 toy that they've been wanting because they picked up their toys. That over a period of time, whether it's rewarding with verbal recognition, with activities, with possessions, whatever it is, I would probably, if you're kind of wondering, maybe start by over rewarding and then wait and see what happens when you don't have a reward. Because when it gets to the point that it's becoming an expectation for your kid rather than an appreciation, that's where you need to make some adjustments with that. But the adjustments are, again, to not let go of the counterpoint that, yes, obedience for obedience sake is a right expectation, but the counterpoint, obedience is worth rewarding, is something that is also a truth, and we want to live in balance with both of those. In the Tuesday episode, I talked about we're still walking through the book of Nehemiah and how God rewarded the people's obedience by his divine timing, where they were able to find out that they needed to celebrate that very month the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles, and how it was their obedience all those weeks and months and days leading up to that point that allowed them to be in position for God's perfect timing to be able to give them a blessing and to be able to give them a special memory and celebration for themselves and their children. And in the same way, as we walk in obedience and teach our children to walk in obedience, then sometimes those rewards come more immediately, and sometimes those rewards come a little further out. But we want to walk in the tension of both of those truths, that we do teach obedience for obedience sake is a right expectation, and obedience is also worth rewarding. All right, my friend, that's going to wrap us up here for today. Hey, if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for High Impact, the weekly newsletter that you can get on my website, stephaniepresents.com. And again, check out speaking engagements that I do offer there to help parents. And also those ratings and reviews that you leave, those are very helpful for me, and they help other people to find the podcast. Until next time, remember this: you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.